Ecclesiastes chapter 10 this morning. As we have been working through this idea of mastering life, we come to another element, another portion of this series, one that I think is vitally important as we look at that video. I want to begin this morning by asking you a question. A question that every one of you will be able to recall almost immediately. Here's the question. How many of you have ever been bitten by an elephant? Anybody? Anyone in this room? How many of you know someone personally who has been bitten by an elephant? I'm going to tell you, I'm not surprised this morning. I kind of anticipated that would be the response, that no one here has ever been bitten by an elephant. But here's another question. How many of you have ever been bitten by a mosquito? How many of you have ever been bitten hundreds, maybe thousands of times by a mosquito? Well, that question really kind of lends itself and demonstrates the importance of what I want to share with you this morning and what we're going to look at, the idea of little things. No one's ever been bitten, here has ever been bitten by an elephant because elephants are pretty big. And we can kind of see them coming. And as a matter of fact, our experience around elephants probably have been a little limited. But nonetheless, we can see those. And so as a result, we're very cautious. We're very careful about being around an elephant. But we've all been annoyed. We've all been bitten. We've all found ourselves 1,000 times over itching and scratching at the results of a very small pest that many times, even unknown to us, has landed on some part of our body, our lives, and stung us. And the truth is that it's the little things in life that often make their way into our lives, causing us to end up maybe scratching our head or frustrated. The area of little things is something that we all need to be challenged to master. But it's not just the aspect of this study. The idea of little things is a major emphasis in the Bible. I looked up this week. The word little or small is actually appears over 400 times in the King James Version of the Bible. So throughout the Scripture, we find this idea convicting. It has become a little more extensive, so much so that this week I made myself a note that I probably at some point will go back and do a several week study on the idea of little things. When it comes to the Bible, God makes a big deal out of little things. You may not realize it, but as you study the Scriptures, the Bible teaches difference in our lives. As I thought about it this week, I've come to realize that there really are no big things. All there are things that are little things that have come together, and the combination of lots of little things making up what we call a big thing. You see, a big problem is not really a big problem. It's just a compilation of a bunch of little things, maybe little decisions and little problems that have come together. And little things are important in our life. I was reminded of that this past week. Last Sunday, after church, the ladies met for their monthly meeting and meal, and several of the guys and husbands and guys and kids went out to Steak and Shake, or for what has affectionately been known since then as Steak and Wait. We had a great time fellowshipping, but this truth of little things came very clear to me last Sunday. We sat down, there was about 15 of us there, and I sat at the end of the table, and Josh Stone sat beside me, and the waiter came, and we ordered our drinks, and I ordered just a glass of water, the base ingredient of sweet tea, all right? I didn't go all out. I just ordered the base of it, all right? I ordered that. Josh ordered water, and our waiter brought our water, and all of a sudden I was thirsty. I grabbed my glass, and I began to drink and guzzle down my water. But Josh, not so much. I looked over at Josh, and he was kind of investigating his glass of water, because they're almost imperceptible to the eye. Literally so small that you could barely see it was a gnat in his water, skinny dipping, right there in his cup of cold ice water. He was just swimming around, and Josh pointed it out. And not only did he point it out, he did the most unusual thing. He slid the water to the side and waited for the waiter. And then when the waiter came, wait for it. Before I tell you what he did, I want to ask you not to judge him too harshly. Okay? He didn't drink the water. Not only did he not drink the water, he asked if he could get another glass of water. I couldn't believe it. I mean, after all, this thing was so small. There was no way that it would have choked him. I mean, it wouldn't have got caught in his throat. I mean, literally, it just looked like maybe the outcome of two atoms that had clashed in the air and fell into his water. It was so small, it couldn't have hurt him, but nonetheless, he would not drink the water and pushed it away and asked for something different. Can you believe it? You know, most of us, as I tell you that story, you're thinking, that's exactly what I would have done. It goes to illustrate the reality that little things are very important. Little things in your glass of water is very important. Little things in your plate of food is very important. I've got to stop because I don't want to make anybody sick this morning, all right? But let's move just a little further and let's talk about even more significance. And here's the reality. Little things in our life and in our spirit and in our attitudes and in our actions are very important. As looking at this week, and as I began to look at this passage, my mind went back to Steak and Shake, and I thought, what a wonderful passage, so many. But notice with me in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 1, as I want to preach to you this morning on the idea of Lord of the Flies. The wise man Solomon says this: dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench. So a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. Solomon draws this picture. He wasn't with us at the Steak and Shake the other day, but he had been somewhere at some point where flies had fallen into, not necessarily a glass of water, but into some ointment. And his experience was such that he had come to a conclusion, and he says, you know what, I want you to understand this. There are little things that make a big difference. In Ecclesiastes chapter 10, these words here he's dealing with practical virtues. They have little organic connection here, but they're a type of sayings that would be expected from a wisdom teacher. And Solomon says, here's something to remember as you're carrying out your life, as you're developing your habits, as you're studying who you are, as you're developing who you are. Flies, little flies that fall in ointment cause the ointment to stink. Most of us would understand that very quickly. And then he goes on, and in essence he says, a little folly mars the effect of wisdom and is sure to make itself conspicuous. Kind of a translation. Little things make themselves conspicuous. As I thought about that passage and this idea of little things, the challenge this morning was that in all of our lives, there are little things that seek to fall into the fabric of who we are and what we do and how we operate and how we think and how we respond. And if we're not careful, those things can affect us. Let me give you a couple of things that I realized from this passage, if you're following along. Number one, our lives are created to be fragrant and medicinal. Our lives are designed or created to be fragrant and medicinal. Solomon says that flies in the ointment. Ointment is just another word. It could be several things. It could be perfume, or it could be some type of ointment, healing ointment, kind of like, it's essential oils is a big thing these days. If anything goes wrong, and they do smell good and probably have some healing value, but in our world, healing oils, essential oils, that's the deal. If your car breaks down, set a bottle on the hood, and man, that thing will crank up, Someone brought something to us and I said, man, that stuff smells good. But not only does it smell good, those oils actually have a healing element to them. They provide something in you. You put it on your sores and they heal. Well, that's the idea. The King James version says little flies in the apothecary. It's the idea of not just one little place, one little oil, but in the drugstore, if you will, where these medicinal oils are, where these fragrant oils are. Little flies in those spoil that. And the point I think that we can make from that is our lives. We are created to be healing and medicinal agents in this world. Yes. And it is little things that will keep us from accomplishing that. I'm reminded of the book of Revelation, chapter 3, where the Lord addresses the churches, the 7 churches of Asia Minor, and the last one that he comes to is the church of Laodicea, and you may know the story of how he begins to talk about all of the things that are going good in their life, but he says, you know what, you're neither hot nor cold, but you're lukewarm, and he says, as a matter of fact, you cause me to spew you out of my mouth. What you may not understand is the picture there of in that area of Laodicea was a place where 2 streams met and converged in the city. There was one stream that come through the city, and it was that of like a hot springs, and it would send warm healing waters with lots of minerals through that city. The other stream was cold, refreshing water. And at the edge of the city, on the outskirts of the city, those rivers would come together, and the hot and the cold waters would merge, and they would become lukewarm. And the problem was, now the water was no good to be medicinal as hot water, and it was no good to be refreshing as cold water. And he says, as it merges, it becomes lukewarm. It's really good for nothing. And as I thought about that is our life. We are created to be fragrant and medicinal. If you don't believe me, let's notice 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 15 and 16 says this, for we are the aroma of Christ to God. among those who are being saved and among those who are perishing. Verse 16, to one a fragrance from death, to the other a fragrance from life to life. Who is sufficient for these things? Did you hear that? We are an aroma to God. Not only are we an aroma to God, we are an aroma to the world around us. He talks about in verse 16, to one fragrance from death, to the other fragrance from life to life. This is what he's saying. He is saying to those who are lost and don't care about spiritual things, what we exhibit in the fragrance may be a little appalling to them. But those that are saved and who are seeking life, our lives become an encouragement to them. We are an aroma to God and an aroma to the world. Here's the question this morning that we have to ask is, how do we smell? And just as Solomon said, this oil it's not only fragrant, but it's medicinal. The same is true of our lives. But here's the second principle that he teaches: inattention to the little things in our life becomes destructive. Inattention to the little things in our life becomes destructive. Now let me just point out here, I think, something that I don't want to overlook. The idea of flies are those little things that are not productive, they're no good, they're things that we don't want in our life. But notice what he says, it's the flies in the ointment. The flies are not a problem as long as they stay outside. We live in a world where there's a lot of problems, right? There's a lot of sin. There's a lot of attitudes, and we're going to face them, and they're going to bump up into the jars of our life. But that's not the problem. Our coming in contact with that. It's when those attitudes and those spirits make their way from the outside inside our lives. But the point that he makes is that inattention to these little things in our lives become destructive. How so? Well, one, it ruins our opportunities and effectiveness. Now keep in mind, I feel like I need to say this. In this setting, there probably was never going to be a time that little flies did not fall into the ointment. That was going to happen. It's just the nature of the age. And in this life as well, there are going to be little things that fall into our life. The problem came was once those flies stayed there. If they fell in and they were quickly removed, then, that probably wasn't all of that much of a problem. But once they fell in and they stayed there, then they began to create a real problem. And I would say that in our life, flies and habits and little things, we're going to have those that come into our life. It's not that ruins our life. It's the inability or the unwillingness to reach in and say, no, that's a problem. I've got to get that out. If I don't deal with this now, it's going to be a problem. We'll say more about that in just a minute. But the inability or inattention to little things in our life becomes destructive two ways. It ruins our opportunities and effectiveness. How so? Last week, that glass of water, although it had major potential to quench someone's thirst, it had major potential to be refreshing. It lost its ability and opportunity to do that because there was something little in it. That's so true of our lives. I want to tell you this morning that every one of us, we can't even begin to imagine the potential and the plans that God has for us. But if we don't take time regularly to look in our lives and look at the small things, we will lose opportunities. They will cease to exist in our lives. Not only that, not only does it ruin our opportunities and effectiveness, but it culminates into a stinky life. Flies in the apothecary or in the ointment, in the oil, create a stench. That happens over the course of time. And it's the little things that come into our life that over the course of time that we are unwilling to deal with, that we're not prepared to deal with, that we won't deal with, that end up creating a life that stinks. Have you ever met someone, not physically, but man, they were just stinky? You just didn't want to be around them. Anybody? Don't point, but anybody ever met somebody like that? You're just like, man, I don't want to be around that person. And their attitude what? Stinks. Their outlook stinks. We find those people, and I begin to, where does that all begin? I tell you where that begins. That begins with a little thing that is not dealt with, and over time it begins to grow. I wrote this down. The foul-mouthed person that no one wants to associate with is the result of someone who didn't give any consideration to their words. See, what they're saying now, it didn't begin there. It was once upon a time when they said something and they didn't give any consideration how it affected someone or what was going on behind those words. The thief or the liar, or the one that no one trusts. It's the result of small decisions that they made and then conviction that they suppressed when they knew they had done wrong. I shouldn't have taken that. Well, we suppress that one little thought and then it gives way to do that again, and over time it builds up. The addict to any drug or pornography began with a single wrong choice that they actually contemplated, and then they chose to go back to it again. See, it's the accumulation of little choices. The bitter person infested becomes that because they choose not to forgive when done wrong. It's that one choice. The critical spirit person made 1,000 small decisions to focus on the negative as opposed to finding something to be thankful for. It's that little decision. And it's those attitudes that really culminate into a stinky life. Let me give you the last thing this morning. Some of you are saying, what, really? The last thing? Already? We're not quite done. The last thing is wisdom is revealed by our attempt to take care of the little things. Wisdom is revealed by our attempt to take care of the little things. Notice what he says in chapter 10, verse 1. Dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. You see the word wisdom? It's wisdom that causes us to make the right choice. But almost, we don't have this, but what's interesting, if you look at this passage, understand that when the Bible was written, when Proverbs was written, it wasn't broken down into chapters and verses like this. But if you'll look at chapter 9 and verse 18, and then you look at chapter 10, verse 2, what you find is this. Let me read it to you. Chapter 9, verse 18, wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Verse 10, a wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. You see the picture? You see what Solomon is saying? He's saying in chapter 10, verse 1, that little things make a big difference in our lives. But before he ever gets there, he says, you know what? Let me talk about the wise person. Then after he talks about those flies, he says in verse 2, let me talk about the wise person and the foolish person. And the point is that wisdom is what allows us to take care of the little things. If we really want to be wise, we have to take care of the little things. Why? Because little things are easier to handle than big things. Little things are easier to handle than big things. You ever help somebody move and they've got a truckload of stuff and you become very strategic? Oh my goodness, that's a dresser. Hand me that little box. Give me both of those little, here, I'll take those in. And you kind of scope it out. I'm going to take these in. Give me a drink of water. Anybody moving that dresser? Anybody moving that piano? When the big stuff, why? But, we don't want to handle the big stuff, do we? We would much rather get the little box, the spice box. Praise God for the spice box, hand me that salt and pepper shaker. I'll take him in. But we don't want to handle the dresser. We don't want to handle the piano. We really don't want to handle the couch, because why? Little things are so much easier to handle than big things. And when it comes to our attitudes and the actions of our life, I want to tell you that what is true with the moving truck is true in our life with attitudes and spirits. If we don't handle that one fleeting thought today, it's going to turn into the piano of tomorrow. Hey, look, that little word that seasons our conversation, that salt and pepper box. If we don't handle the seasoning of our language and our thoughts and our attitudes today, it's going to turn into something that we cannot carry on our own tomorrow. Little things become big, or little things are easier to handle than big things. You see, in reality, we never master a big thing. We only master little things, which end up helping us to master big things. I like what Rob Morgan said. The little tasks we accomplish are often greater than the big ones we envision. And in any event, they're the stuff from which a lasting legacy is composed. Here's what he's saying. You ever say, yeah, I know that's a big problem. I'm going to deal with that one of these days. That's what we envision. We envision dealing with the big issues of our life, but we will only deal with the big issues of our life that we plan to take care of in the future, when we retire, when the kids are grown, when this happens, when we get out of debt. We only handle the big things that we envision by handling the little things that come our way today. And what we are doing, the little steps that we're making every day, are the things that's really creating our legacy. Kind of along the same line is this: little things always become big things if not dealt with. Little things always become big things if not dealt with. I remember when our children was born. I remember our first child, when Joshua was born. He weighed about 6 pounds and something. And then we went to his 3-month checkup, and he weighed 15 pounds or something like that. And I thought, oh my goodness, this thing is doubling in weight. Every couple of months, by the time he is 6, he's going to weigh 1,000 pounds. This is not good. Whether it's our children, whether it's a car problem. You ever had a car problem and it's just that one little light on the dashboard? And you could have taken and got it done, and it would cost you $38. But because we didn't deal with that, this is the way my dad used to do. That black electrical tape. Just get you a big old piece of black electrical tape, stick it right there over the light. That's just as good as dealing with it. You can't see it, it's not bothering you, But here's the problem. You don't get that little check engine light taken care of, and all of a sudden that becomes bigger, doesn't it? And now you've got to replace the engine. Now you've got to replace the car. Why? Because little things don't stay little, they become big. And if there is a little issue in our marriages, look, you better deal with it. It's not going to stay little, it's going to become bigger. If there's little things in our children's lives and the way we parent, they're not going to stay little. You have to deal with them. Little things become big things if not dealt with. You say, well, how do I know if I can deal with it? Well, this is what I wrote down this week. If it's big enough for God to deal with you about, it's big enough for you to deal with God about. Now let's pause for just a moment and think about little things in our life. Chances are the Lord just brought something to your attention. If it's big enough for God to deal with in your life, it's big enough for you to deal with God about it in your life. So whatever that thing is, whatever that thing was, whatever that habit, whatever that attitude, whatever that action, whatever it is something that you have to deal with. In conclusion, let me share with you a verse that you probably know, Mathew chapter 25, verse 23. His master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." Or it could be stated, "You've been faithful over little, and I will make you ruler over much." This week, as I studied that passage, a thought came to me that I'd never really realized and saw from this. That's the positive stated. You've been faithful over little, I will make you ruler over much. But here's the other side of that. If we are not faithful in the little, we will be ruled over by much. Now let that set in for a minute. You see, if I am faithful in the little areas of my life, God is going to reward me by making me ruler over more. Well, in that event, in that transition, what happens is when I become ruler over more, guess what also happens? There is less that rules over me. And when I'm not faithful in the little, I will never be made ruler over much. And as a result, I will live my life being ruled by things, people, ideas, habits that I don't want to be ruled by. I tell you what, I don't want more than necessary to rule over my life. Do you? We like control. Anybody in here like control? Yeah, all of us like to be in control. I want to tell you, the way that we have more control in our life is by mastering the little things of our life. I love reading about John Wooden, the basketball coach, the legendary basketball coach of UCLA, won 10 national titles in 12 years. While there, or in a 12-year period. All unheard of, not almost unheard of, unheard of. It had never happened before, and chances are it will never happen again. 10 national titles, and this is what John Wooden said about that. He said, little things are vital. It is the little things that make big things happen. I listened to him talk about how he carried out his practices each day, and he carried out his practices and drills almost to the second every day. This is what we're going to do for this 1 minute and 12 seconds. And this is what we're going to do for this 49 seconds or this 28 minutes, and everything, every little detail was made. And if you ask him, you can't ask him now, but if you would have asked him, how did you accomplish that? He would come back to this idea. It is the little things that make a big difference. So I ask us this morning, what are the little things in our life that we need to control? What are the little flies that are in the ointment of our life that are causing us to lose opportunity and effectiveness in being medicinal and fragrant in this world? What are the little things in our life that are keeping our aroma of being pleasing to God? Now, I'm not talking about the things that they're hitting the jar of your life and my life. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not the problem. The problem are the little things that fall inside the jar that we overlook, and in our busyness or in our inability or in our lack of wisdom, we say, well, I'll take care of that later. I want to remind us today, it's the little things. It's the little flies removed from our life that give us the ability to do greater things with our life.